Good evening and welcome. I'm John Abel and I have the honor of introducing a man that everybody knows and some of you are related to, so not much of a job. This is the final segment of our third Thursday lecture series for the 2023 season, and we have had some terrific presentations this year. But I thought we would save one of the very best for last. So Ed Flory is going to show us some interesting information about the hotels and boarding houses of Stroudsburg. And I'm sure many of you know Ed from Plans and Designs. I know my wife does. And also, I thought it was a pretty unique reference point that you have lived in a house in East Stroudsburg. So your family since 1780 to 2002.
I sold it in 2002.
I think it gives you a terrific perspective on that. So without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Ed Flory.
It's a pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you for all coming out. I didn't expect quite this big a crowd until Tanya told me, I think it was yesterday, that there were about 60 people signed up. But it's a pleasure to be here. And before I start, I'd like to thank two people who have generously helped me as I did my research on the hotels and boarding houses in Monroe County. The first one is Tanya Shelton, who sits right here, and she is a research librarian at the Monroe County Historical Association. I keep saying society, but she was very helpful in helping me guide me through all the information and that was available over the Historical Society. And with her help, I was able to access hundreds of files, photos, books, postcards, and old newspaper articles. I even went into a few obituaries. And believe it or not, you can get information of who owned what and when from obituaries. And the other one I'd like to thank is Jim Adams, who is the curator over at the Eastern Monroe Public Library. He helped me on my research there, and he also obtained a grant to copy all my photos, postcards, and the information cards that I have with them. And they are on the library website. So if you'd like to take a look at them, go on the library website and you'll find them there. Whoops, can't hit that. Let me go back. Okay, when COVID started, I had always collected fire stamps, and I pretty well had most of them from all over the world. So I needed a new project, so I got the idea of collecting postcards and photos of hotels and boarding houses in Monroe County. Later on, it went to Pike County. And I didn't really know what I was getting myself into when I did that. I now have over 650 different hotels and boarding houses and over 1,400 photos and postcards. You'll see a lot of them tonight. Information on most of the bigger hotels are not hard to find. It's pretty pretty easy to get it. But on the smaller hotels and the boarding houses, it's a lot more difficult. To make extra cash in the summer, many families rented out their rooms to tourists, and the families slept in the barn or in the attic. And people made a lot of money for their family doing that, although you wouldn't think so today when it was $6 a week. So, you have to think in terms of the money back then. The boarding houses were really difficult in many cases because they would open up one year and the next year the family didn't want to do it and they'd close. And there was no notice or anything. They just didn't put an ad anywhere for taking people in. Hotels in the Poconos thrived a lot from 1900 up to about 1930, 1940. And then the car came about. earlier, but it wasn't until the 30s or the 40s until people started traveling further and faster. So instead of taking, I don't know, coming by horseback or with horse and carriage from New York, you would come by car and probably make it an hour and a half, 2 hours. Where it might, I don't know, it might take you 2 days by horse and buggy. I'm not really sure of that distance. So the hotels did great. A lot of people came in on the train and then took a carriage or to where the hotel was. And they stayed there. They didn't really travel around much until the car came around. So the hotels did quite well, and the boarding houses until about the late 30s and the 40s. Then the people with the cars started, and most families had a car about that time, they started traveling further and further away. And they also kind of started coming up for shorter times, so they didn't come to the Poconos a lot. And then motels came along and started picking up a lot of the people that were vacationing, because they could stay one place one night and go another place another night. So, and also the hotels in the 40s and into the 50s were getting kind of old and shabby. So, and the boarding houses, and people had money, were starting to make money. So after the war especially, so nobody wanted to run a boarding house anymore. So you started to see a downturn. You also started to see a little more fires up in the Poconos, as people didn't know what to do with the hotel. So all of a sudden the stove burned over and the hotel burned down. So there were quite a few fires in the 40s and 50s. So tonight I'd like to start, this is East Stroudsburg, Stroudsburg. I'd like to start at the corner of Crystal and Anna Lomic Street at the Anna Lomic Hotel. It was built in 1857 by Richard Poston, who operated until 1861. John Hill operated in the 1880s. And then from there to 1935, Grant Lance, Thomas Dunn, and C.J. Scully were operators. It was raised in the 1935s, and a post office was built in East Stroudsburg. How many people here remember the post office being there in East Stroudsburg? Not too many. Since May 23rd, 1970, it's the site of the East Stroudsburg Borough Hall. And Doc's lunch wagon used to be situated in the 1930s between the hotel and the railroad tracks. If I can get this right. Okay. Now we're going to go down Crystal Street to the Lackawanna Hotel, which I think many of you know. In 1874, Benjamin Van Colt built an addition to a residence and opened the Lackawanna Hotel. There were many owners until 1922, when it was purchased by Nathan Bress, and it could accommodate 150 people. Bress's nephew, Stanley Borstein, operated for many years until he sold it in 2020. Actually, it wasn't a hotel in the true name of a hotel for quite a few years, because it went to apartments on long-term year or so leases. And after Prohibition, the Lackawanna Hotel was the first bar in the county to get a liquor license. Now we're going down to the corner of Washington and Crystal Streets to the Crystal Springs Hotel. It was built in 1856 by John Thomas, who operated until 1864. It was operated until 1873 by John Kresge. And James K. Fenner operated until 1880, when James M. Place took over and operated in 1910. And then on February 6, 1920, the hotel was destroyed by fire. And here we have a postcard showing the hotel the morning after the fire. And it says, the ruins of the Crystal Springs Hotel, East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, the morning after the fire of February 6, 1910. With the thermometer below zero, the Acme Hose Company battled successfully with the flames and the elements. Many of the firemen were clothed with ice and suffered greatly from exposure. And actually, that was only 20 years after the fire company was developed in 1890. My Aunt Ruth, who lived to be 103, told me quite a few times that she walked by that, and that's not her in the picture, but she walked by that hotel the morning after the fire on her way to college. And she said that the hoses were all frozen into the road like spaghetti. The Fenner Hotel was built in 1911 on the foundation of the Crystal Springs Hotel by Samuel Fenner. In 1913, the town clock was erected on top of the roof of the hotel, which you see here. In the 1830s, it was operated by W.L. Boeing with 60 rooms at $14 weekly. In 1940, it was purchased by Louis Rabinowitz, and in the 1970s, it was torn down to extend the PNC parking lot. And the clock that was on top of the hotel was moved in 1973 to the top of the Borough Hall, where it stands today. Now we're going to move up to East Broad Street, just before the railroad tracks, to the Prospect House. It was opened in 1882 and was operated until at least 1912 by Mrs. Charles Durr. There was even a little road that used to go into it that was called Durr Street. It could accommodate 80 guests at $8 weekly. In 1918, it was a hospital for the Spanish flu. Mr. and Mrs. Charles Decker were the last proprietors, and during the 1955 flood, which I'm sure many of you remember, furniture was stored there and then dispersed to the flood victims. The Baptist Church purchased the lot in 1965 and raised it to build a parking lot. And I was in J.M. Hill in the early 50s and walked past this hotel every day going to school. Really didn't know what the name was at that time because it was closed and it was vacant. Now we're going to go up to North Cortlandt Street, where the South High School is now, to the Locust Grove House. In 1870, I don't think anybody remembers that, but in the 1870s, the property was owned by the Ransbury family. In 1875, it became the boarding house called Locust Grove House. In 1881, it was operated by Elder Bush, whose name really was William Bush, but he was an elder and a deacon at the First Presbyterian Church, so they called him deacon for a while, and then he became elder. And he was actually married to Ellen Ransbury, they had originally owned the property. In 1905, Mrs. George W. Sears operated the hotel. The Locust Grove House was purchased in 1908 by Martin L. Bach and renamed the Maplehurst Inn. It was enlarged to accommodate 125 guests at $8 weekly in 1909. In 1930, it was purchased by William Burnett, and he operated it until he died in 1940. It sat vacant after that, and in 1945, it was purchased by the school district and raised. I remember playing across from I think you all know where the Bumble School used to be. There was a field across the road, and we played softball on it, and in the winter they were flooded, and we'd ice skate on it. And if you went up the hill behind where we played to a little rise, you could still see the foundations of the Maplehurst Inn. They're not there today because when they did, I was at teaching at high school when they pulled out a swimming pool as they were building the new high school. But I don't think it came from the Maplehurst Inn. I'm not quite sure where it came from because the swimming pool at the Maplehurst Inn was outside, and it was a real large pool, but they did pull one out in that area. Now we're going to move just a little further up to the corner of Maple Avenue and North Cortlandt Street to the Lawn Cottage. It was built in 1875 as a residence for C.E. Durfee. He started renting rooms to summer guests and named it the Lawn Cottage. A large farm next door supplied vegetables and fruits for the hotel. And here we see it in an 1895 photo. The Lawn Cottage was purchased to T.C. Dickinson in 1908 and renamed the Berwick Inn. It could accommodate 100 guests at $8 weekly. It had steam heat, electric lights, baths, toilets, and a wardrobe in each room. In 1938, it was raised to build the Berwick Heights area, housing area. And here we see the demolition, a 1938 photo that shows the Berwick Inn being demolished. The third floor and the porches have already been removed. And it's a nice little old truck there. I'm not sure what year it is, but you don't see many of them around anymore. Now we're going to move up to the northeast side of Eagle Valley Corners to the Eagle Valley Hotel, which I'm sure a lot of you will remember. It was built in 1909 by Daniel Van Wy and operated by S.O. Koss. And it could accommodate 35 guests at $7 weekly and was opened all year. This photo was taken in the 1950s by Elizabeth Walters. In 1970s, it was a bar that served locals and college students. I remember we had a cottage up in Antelope, my parents had a cottage up in Antelope Lake, and we used to drive by that all the time, and in the 50s and 60s, I don't remember the porch that went around it was still there, and in the basement they had an antique store. And just up on Milford Road from the old Eagle Valley Hotel was the Dimmick Tourist Home. It was operated in the 1930s and 1940s by Victor and Mary Dimmick as a small boarding home for tourists by the day or week. It later became a private residence, and in the early 2000s it was demolished to build a branch bank, which is now closed. At least the house lasted longer than the bank. Now we're going to go to the corner of Brookside Avenue and King Street to the Brookside Farm. It was built in 1799 as a residence. And it was operated in 1909 by Carl Brown as Brookside Farm and could accommodate 25 guests at $9 weekly from June to October. It had a 65-acre farm to supply food. And at that time, that was kind of a necessity because there wasn't you couldn't store food very long back at that time. The canning didn't come into the United States until the late 1800s. And in the 1880s, ice boxes became common, but they didn't hold much. And the first electric refrigerator was developed by GE in 1927. So you kind of had to put fresh food somewhere around or a lot of it would spoil. Now we're going down to the right of which is Stokes' Mill Road, which now is Old Mill Road, just before the bridge, to the old homestead. In 1897, Lucinda Bird sold the property to Emma B. Beardsley, who remodeled the house into a boarding house, which could accommodate 35 guests at $7 weekly in the summer months. It advertised Hebrews, not entertained. And that was kind of a common thing, especially as you moved up further to the bigger hotels in the Poconos, the upper Poconos. They also used the words a lot, Christian clientele only. And it wasn't until the middle 1940s that the first Jewish-owned hotel opened in the Poconos. And then two other ones followed not long after. Now we're going to move down to Lincoln Avenue to the Fern Dining Room and Annex. And to tell you the truth, I never heard of this place until I found the postcard. In the 1940s, it was operated by Mrs. L. Rosier with well-ventilated rooms for either weekend or vacation guests. It had home cooking with butter, milk, eggs, and fresh fruit and vegetables from its own farm. Again, most of them, if you read through the Poconos, most of them had their own big gardens, and some of them even had animals. It provided croquet, outdoor sports, and racing games, and it had ample parking. That's about all I could find about the place. Now we're going to, just a minute, I flipped too far. Now we're going to move over to Stroudsburg to West Main Street, to the Lyndhurst. In 1909, it was operated by C.J. Rice and could accommodate 135 guests. In May 1912, it was sold to Mary Brown and her son Robert. It consisted of a 3-story main house, a 2-story guest house, and a barn. On March 13, 1926, lightning struck the main building, which burned to the ground, and the place closed. And while we're talking about, we just mentioned the fire was a constant danger in hotels. And some people suffered more from it than others. John Purdy Cope owned the Water Gap Hotel, and that burned in 1915. And then he went and purchased the Kittatinny, which burned in 1931. He wasn't too lucky. Both of them burned in the off-season as repairs were being done. And then there were the Price brothers who owned the Spruce Cabin Inn in Canadensis. The inn burned in 1891 and 1902, and it was rebuilt. And then it burned again in 1920, and it was closed. I guess they figured 3 times was enough. But okay, also on West Main Street was the Lenape Terrace. In 1910 and 1912, J.P. Paul was listed as the proprietor. It could accommodate 25 guests at $8 weekly from June to October. In 1933, it was operated by Mrs. J.P. Paul, and today is a private residence. Just excuse me for a minute, I need a little moisture.
Do you know the address of that place on West Main Street?
No, I don't. I tell you the truth, I hadn't found time to go over and see if I could find it. I'm not really sure. I would guess it might be somewhere up from Stroudsburg High School, but I'm not.
I wonder if that's the one next to the big store.
Yeah. Where?
I thought maybe it was the one next to the Westgate building, that big house that kind of sits back.
It could be. I guess I should get in my car and go over and see where it is. But I'll tell you, that's one of the problems with a lot of these hotels, and especially the boarding houses. You find out information about it, but nobody tells you right where it is. It'll say Stroudsburg or Poconos or something like that, which doesn't give you much of help. Now we're going to the corner of 8th and Main Streets to the American House, which I'm sure a lot of you remember.
Yes.
In 1834, it was purchased by Margaret and Alexander Eagles, who raised the dwelling and built a brick hotel called the Travelers Inn. After several owners, it was purchased by Charles Eberly, who renamed it the American House. In 1925, it was purchased by the Weiss family, and in 1990, it was renamed the Carlton House. And again, I think by that time, it really, I don't know if it was truly a hotel, but more people that lived there for a month or a year at a time. And in 2009, it was badly damaged by fire and was demolished in 2014, and it's still a vacant lot today. And now we go to the Mansion House, which a lot of you know well, on the corner of Main and 9th Street. It was built in 1795 by Jacob Stroud as a residence for his son John. It was a tavern from 1837 to 1839. In 1847, Mrs. Margaret Eagles from the Travelers Inn left and went over there and ran a place called the Mansion House Inn. I couldn't find how long she ran it, but I think it was probably 5 or 6 years. And from 1858 to 1920, it was a private residence. And now, in 1921, it became the home of the Monroe County Historical Society, which is now the association. Now we're going to move down to the north side of Main Street between 8th and 9th to the Indian Queen Hotel. It was a John Mitchell residence, and then it was converted into a stagecoach stop. Several owners had it before 1867 when it was purchased by Jacob Schaefer, who enlarged it and named it the Indian Queen Hotel. And here we see a 1899 photo which shows the first automobile to visit the hotel. And that was kind of early for an automobile, but there it is. In 1909, W.S. Schaefer operated it and could accommodate 150 guests at $10 weekly. In 1933, it was owned by C.E. McGuinn, and in 1953, it was purchased by Gerald O'Neill. Many of you know him, know that he also owned the Penn Stroud Hotel. In 1964, it was raised for the Citizens Bank. And it was either in the 50s or 1960s, I remember, it was also used as an ESU dormitory for a few years. Now we're going down to the corner of 7th and Main to the property that probably had hotels with more names and more owners than any hotel in the Poconos. We're going to go to the Stroudsburg house, which was built by Stroud J. Hollingshead and was opened in 1833. He operated in 1859 when he sold to Charles Troche. Troche sold it to Linwood Marsh, and then it was operated by John Allender, who sold it to Henry Fulmer. And we see a carriage out there, I guess waiting to either pick somebody up or go in. Whoops. I'm not really used to doing this. Now, in 1874, the Stroudsburg house was sold to William H. Fable, who renamed it the Burnett House in honor of State Senator Charlton Burnett. He operated it until 1893, and it could accommodate 150 guests. And in this 1898 photo, it shows the hotel when Joseph Aldorf owned it. And in 1907, George W. Fable purchased the Burnett House and named it the Hotel Fulmer, which also could accommodate 150 guests. In 1912, H.C. Toller was listed as the owner. And the Hotel Fulmer also served as a hospital in 1918 for the Spanish epidemic. Now, in 1920, the Hotel Fulmer was purchased by Charles Van Brock and was renamed the Penn Stroud Hotel. In 1946, it was purchased by Gerald O'Neill. He died in 1955, and his wife Regina operated the hotel in 1965. Since then, the hotel has had many owners and many names. And I tried hard to find the exact information on all those names, and I found different sources that didn't agree with each other. So, and the Penn Stroud just reopened lately, and is still in operation today. Now we're going down to one that most people I don't think know, between 5th and 6th Street on the north side of Main Street. It was built in 1851 by John H. Mellick as a Fort Penn house. Then it was turned into a warehouse. In the 1880s, it was purchased by John S. McNeil, who turned it back into a hotel named the Central House. In 1910, it became a retail store, and in 1948, it was raised to make room for the A.B. White department store. And now we're going down to the corner of 5th and Main Street, to the Washington House, which was built in the early 1800s by Mr. Keener, and was the second hotel built in Stroudsburg. And you can see from 1828, 1880, it had a lot of owners. In 1880, William Dreher took over, and in 1909, the hotel was operated by Edward D. Schaefer and could accommodate 75 guests at $7 weekly. And here we see the Washington House being demolished in the 1940s. The roof has been taken off, and the part of the second floor is removed. And unless you haven't guessed it by now, the property now is the site of the Kentucky Fried Chicken. And if you look closely, you can see it was two-way traffic on 5th Street at that time, because there's a car coming out and another one headed in. Now we're going to move up the Stokes' Mill Road across from the Moose Lodge. In 1885, John St. Burnett purchased a house and planted a 15-acre vineyard. Later, he added a 3-story annex, which he called the Vineyard Cottage. It could accommodate 35 guests at $7 weekly from May to November. In 1905, his son, Nicholas St. Burnett, followed as operator. In the late 1930s, St. Burnett and Joyce operated a boarding house and is now a private residence. And during the Depression, 15 homeless men lived in the cottage. I didn't say whether they paid or free, but I got the impression it was free. Now we're going to start up on Godfrey's Ridge at the Avon House. In 1897, it was operated by T. Palmer with rates of $7 weekly and was open May through November. It advertised first-class sanitary arrangements. And let's talk about sanitary arrangements. I always love it when you see, when you see in the ad that the hotel has modern sanitary arrangements, and that's in 1900 or 1905. You're not quite sure what modern means. In the middle of 1800s and before that, chamber pots and outhouses were used, and I yet have not figured out a hotel with 150 people in it how you could have enough outhouses. But I guess they were used to them in those times. Indoor plumbing in the U.S. didn't start till about 1880, and many of the larger hotels had indoor plumbing in the early 1900s, and it was mainly to the 1920s before most of the boarding houses got it. And even then, the biggest hotels had one bathroom on each floor, with maybe 30 or 40 people enjoying the use of that bathroom. And most boarding houses back in the 1920s and even in the 1930s had one bathroom and bathtub and toilet and one in the whole hotel, the whole boarding house. So there probably was waiting lines. Now we're going to go up on Godfrey's Ridge still to the Churley Inn. In 1902, it was a residence of Samuel Collins, and in 1904, it was converted into a boarding house named the Churley Inn. In 1905, Collins left town, and if you want to find more out about that, there's something. If you go onto the Historical Society pages, you'll see there's an article on Samuel Collins. He kind of left in a hurry. In 1905, it was purchased by A.C. Gorman. It could hold 100 guests. It partially burned in 1931 and was later purchased by Benjamin Hewitt, who renamed it Mountain Crest Lodge. In 1963, that was burned down as fire practice by the fire company.
There's one point you should mention about it. That was a house of prostitution.
Was it? I hadn't found that out anywhere. Thank you. No, I didn't know that. Maybe that's why he left town. Also, where the Stroudmoor gift shop is now, was the Highlandale House. In 1896, it was operated by C.H. Palmer as the Highlandale House. In 1909, it was operated by Charles M. Folk and could hold 150 guests at $12 weekly from May to December. In 1915, it was owned by Lewis Pollock, and in 1927, it was owned by C.C. and Rossi, and the east side of the building burned. And that's why the building that you now see as a gift shop is a smaller half of it. In 1927, the Highlandale House was purchased by the Nickman family, who renamed it Stroudsburg. In 1940, the Bush family, I think that's pronounced right, ran it until 1984, when it was sold to the Pyrone family, who still operate it today, with all their restaurants. And I think there's more restaurants than there is housing right now, overnight staying. Also on Stroudmoor Road was the Highland Inn, and it was the second hotel as you went into Stroudmoor Road. It was from 1897 to 1911. It was operated by C.H. Palmer. In 1912, it was operated by Ivan and M.S. Hudlers, and it could accommodate 75 guests at $12 weekly, with private bath suites, which in 1912 is very unusual, where you had your own bathroom in your suite, electric lights and steam heat. In the 1920s, the Highland Inn was purchased and the name was changed to the Ridgecrest. In 1942, it was Ridgecrest Ranch, a dude ranch owned by Ma and Pa Whalen. Sounds like a nice name for running a dude ranch. I cannot find out what happened to it after that, whether it was torn down or what happened to it. Also on Stroudmoor Road, and the first hotel as you traveled on the road, was a Penland, built in 1880 by Marshall Merwin, who operated the hotel for 25 years. In 1905, it was purchased by Joseph F. Folk and was operated by his daughters, Franny and Susan Folk. In 1909, it could accommodate 30 guests at $12 to $14 weekly from June to October. On May 29, 1927, it was destroyed by fire and it was never rebuilt. Also on Godfrey's Ridge, but this time looking over Cherry Valley, was the Maple and the Pines. It was operated in the early 1900s by the Wiley brothers and had a fine view of the Delaware Water Gap. In 1904, it was operated by S.P. Fable, and in 1909 and 1912, Stoner and Fable were the listed owners. It could accommodate 50 guests at $8 and up weekly from June to October. And now we're going to go over to Arlington Heights, to the Brookside Farm Vacation Home. In 1947, it was operated by the Schuberts and the Salweskis as a family resort. It was located on 35 acres and had a recreation hall and was open from May to October. And the last one of our slides showing either a hotel or a boarding house was a Friendly Guest House. In 1948, it was operated by Henry Newman and it provided archery, croquet, badminton, horseshoes, ping pong, and shuffleboard. And again, I can find no trace of it after that. And as we see the girl in the lawn of the Friendly Guest House waving us goodbye, we're going to go to the last two slides. And these are places, and I'm not going to read them all, I'll leave it up for a few minutes. These are places that I found, but I needed more information. In most cases, I found information out about them, but I don't have a picture or a postcard. In a couple of places, I have pictures, but no other information. So if anybody knows anything about these places, I'd be glad to have them give me a call and let me know what the information is. I think the Bleak House up on Godfrey's Ridge that was owned by Samuel Folk might have become one of the other hotels in time, but maybe it was added on to or something, but I can't find any proof of that. I just that the same people own the hotels. Yes.
Was the Avon House also a farm or a horse farm?
Not that I know of, but the Ridgewood, the Ridgecrest up there might have been very close to it. So they may have had horses, maybe for them or something. I haven't seen, as I say, I found a 1898 brochure for the Avon cottage, and I can't find anything else. So it gets very discouraging sometimes. Everybody look at that, because I have one more slide. And here's some more. The Warner Hotel, I got a postcard that on the back said that the Warner Hotel was next to the, and it showed the Butcher's Candy Kitchen, and there was a livery sign in the front just a little further down the street, but I couldn't find any sign for the hotel, but the back of the postcard said that it was there, crossing the Penn Stroud. And the Shim bungalows in the old Homestead Inn, I have postcards for them and nothing else. And the old Homestead Inn is the building on the postcard is different than the one that's on Stokes Mill Road. Are there any questions? Yeah.
I knew a fellow when I was a little kid that was in the banking business, and his name was Ed Flory. Are you related to him?
That's my father.
That's your father.
Yeah.
How old are you?
How old am I? I'll be 85 in January.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incidentally, since he was in the banking business, he would know this better than you at the time, and you told us. But you said the bank, on Main Street, where the Citizens Bank is, that was not turned down for the Citizens Bank, it was turned down for the Monroe Security.
That's right, yeah, it was, that's right, yeah. That's right, it was Monroe Security first, you're right, yeah. My dad was also mayor during the flood, 55 flood, yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Sam Collins, he was a basic
Yeah.
Flatland man here. He owned that property up on Godfrey Ridge, and he called it Shirley Inn.
Yeah,
I've
Shirley.
always been interested in that name. The name has to mean something.
I couldn't find anything
No.
about it. I don't know. Unless it was just, maybe it was a family name.
I mean, yeah.
It might have been, that's what I thought maybe. It might have been a family name.
Okay.
But I'm not sure.
Yeah,
It's an odd name.
It is.
It's a real odd name. But then again, some of the other hotels in the Poconos are real odd names too. So, yes.
The Berwick Heights Inn, it was on Cortland Street, North Cortland.
Yeah.
I have a newspaper article, like, because I have newspapers.com, so I found a picture, an illustration, and it looks like it was way up on a hill, but it also, then I get conflicting reports about where it was located. Was it on?
Oh, just a minute
Or was
here.
it like way up?
Let me
on
go
the
back to that if I can
Berwick
get
Heights
back
Inn?
to it.
And it was owned by Dufresne, I think. And there were two sisters, one that owned the Maplehurst, and then the
Whoops.
one that owned
Can I
Berwick.
pass it? Yeah. And now, the only thing, I have it as being at the corner of
Ovino's maybe.
yeah, well, right in the parking lot right across from Kramer's, yeah.
Right.
By Bovino's. And if you look in the picture, you can see it's kind of cut off, but there's a set of steps that go up from North Cortland Street. And there might have been a little rise at that time, and it's been taken down when they made the
It
parking
was
lot.
like an etching of it, before it was called the Berwick Heights Inn, it was Lawn Cottage by Fickerson, and the illustration.
Oh, I have that illustration. Yeah.
Way up on a hill or something.
Yeah, well, I think it's more the way it shows it, this way it's drawn. It sits back and it makes it look like it's sitting up on the illustration.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the one with the horse and buggy
Yes.
coming out the front?
Yeah,
Yeah, I have that illustration.
And it was owned by two sisters. The
Yeah.
father gave it to two sisters.
What?
Maplehurst and Berwick Heights, or Lawn Cottage, were owned by two sisters. And they married, and their husbands' names were the ones that were the owners' names. But it was
Yeah,
two
yeah.
sisters.
The Maplehurst was a big place. It had a bar, a recreation center, 2 or 3, 4 buildings, and it got to be a real big place. And Martin Bach also owned, and I think I'm right on this, a hotel up in Bushkill, Riverside Hotel in Bushkill. He was an owner of that before he bought the Maplehurst. I know, because I also have about 280 photos and pictures of hotels in Pike County. I didn't learn enough doing Monroe County, so had to go to Pike County.
Was the railroad station used by passengers that was further down King Street?
Yeah, I also have some pictures. I did some research on the railroad stations, and it was, from what I can see, if you went in by the car wash, and they're remodeling right now, right above the tracks, and you went around right before Birch Street went off. It sat right in there.
There's one further down by the Cinder Inn, there's like a really.
There was another one that Cinder Inn. And there also was a roundhouse. I remember it as a kid there that repaired trains, and you can see the turntable go around and put it into the different spaces on the roundhouse. Yeah, I don't know how many of you remember that.
My dad used to take us there and said, you go there because you never get cornered.
Never get cornered in a roundhouse, right, Bob?
That building sat there a long time.
Yeah, that building sat there. But I never knew until I started doing some research on the railroad stations of Monroe County that there was one up there, like she just said, and then there was I'm trying to think how many. I think 22 stations in Monroe County. A lot of them were for the Delaware Valley Railroad, which ran from East Stroudsburg to Bushkill. That's the tracks went by right there behind the Huffman store.
Yep.
And The funny thing there on that railroad, the train couldn't turn around, so it went up backwards to Bushkill, then came down the right way when it came back down to East Stroudsburg.
I got pictures of it in Bushkill.
Yeah.
Oh, it's good.
You were saying that, I think you said Maplehurst was where the house, East Stroudsburg South was?
Yeah.
And then you were saying something about there was a field across the street from
The Vine Street now goes in down by the where Smitty's rental used to be.
Okay, yep,
When I was a kid, Vine Street went in by the Bunnel,
okay.
right just north of the Bunnel. And on the other side, there were fields.
Oh.
And they were playing, they were used for the kids to take recreation from school.
Now,
But-
did you say that Maplehurst also had like a very large plot of land?
Yeah, oh, it was a big plot. It probably went from where Vine Street went in before at the Bunnel, it probably went up to, I would guess, about where the dairy used to be.
Just about Maple Avenue.
Yeah, just about the Maple Avenue, yeah. It was a big property. It had 7 or 8 buildings. I have if you want to look at it, I have my book with me. What did I do? It's in here. My one's for East Stroudsburg, Stroudsburg, and you can see the whole layout of it.
Oh, okay.
If you want to take a look
That's
at
far
it.
back to where the
We're back.
football fields and stuff.
Do you remember where the shop, where they built the shop before they built the high school? They built it, and that was just about on the edge. Yeah.
Some of those properties went all the way back to the Broadhead.
Well, yeah.
Because I searched titles and came in.
Yeah.
Durfee particularly.
Well, the Berwick Inn used to advertise. The Berwick Inn advertised boating and swimming, and it was down at the Sambo Creek. So that's the only place I can figure it was, because they owned all the way back to the Sambo Creek. Yeah, at least.
The railroad right away, I think part of that's been taken away. There was a bridge back there, and the Durfee property went all the way back to that road.
Yeah, and the Delaware Valley Railroad used to go. My aunt and I used to ride horses back, and that went up to Stokes Metal Bridge, up along the creek, and went back in there. Yeah. Well, they had a 65-acre farm, so you know that they owned a lot of property at the Berwick Inn. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay.
Now, we live by Salmon Creek up on Fawn Road, and our neighbor's farm, if you're going up towards Brushy Mountain Road, there's the barn. That was built in 1913. It's right before the reservoir and the stone house. And below that is a stone house that was built in 1863 by Jacob Rustin, or Rustin, however you say his name. Years later, his descendants would visit our neighbor and give him old deeds to the property. And there was supposedly an old boarding house there at some point. But behind that house, there's what's left of an old homestead. And I remember my grandpa telling me at one point it collapsed and then it burned down years ago too.
Yeah, I remember talking to you over at the Historical Society the one day about that.
If I find any information.
Yeah, if you find anything, I went back and I can't find anything, and I keep a lot of records, and I can't find anything where there was anything there by Brushy Mountain. But it may have been before records were really kept, and I mean, there's probably a lot of boarding houses that I don't know about. Just to show you, Shahola, up in Pike County, a lady wrote a book, and supposedly has pictures and postcards of 50, and it has 55 different boarding houses just in the little village of Shahola and the surrounding area. And Shahola can't be that big. I don't know exactly what the population is, but there were 55 boarding houses in that area. So, I don't think all at one time, but I think maybe it varied, but I know that just blows my mind. And if you go up, I forget how many I have for Antelope and Henryville. I think I have a whole album of just Antelope and Henryville hotels and boarding houses. It's amazing how many there were. You just can't comprehend it. There were a lot of people trying to make a little extra money on the side.
I think I remember reading something on the page at one point about that there was, up on Godfrey Ridge at one of the older hotels that were there that has since gone, but there's like the remnants of the swimming pool is still up there. Nearby Stradmore, but I don't know which hotel it
That's
was.
the church.
Oh, that is the Shirley?
Is that the Charlie? Is that on Stroudsburg Road, was it? Because I've never really been able to find the location.
But supposedly there's the remnants of the pool is back in there.
Where on Stroudsburg?
You have to look at it, what's his name? I can't think of his name. He did the presentation, it's on YouTube.
Bill Whiteson.
Just say that again.
Bill Whiteson.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Look at him, yeah, look at him on YouTube.
What's the name of it, do you know?
What's the name of his presentation? Godfrey Street.
There's a parking lot, because there's a trail you can make up to it, there's a parking lot. I don't know
Yeah,
if
it
it's-
was a great presentation, a lot of information.
Yeah, I remember.
Okay, Whitesman, I'll have to write that down when I get over there. Oh, here's one. Yeah, see, you get information, but you have to follow it up.
Delaware water gap was loaded with boarding houses too, because that was the first train stop.
Yeah, for the first, when the first hotels were built, they were built in Delaware Water Gap because the train stopped there and everybody came up from New York. I have 3 albums of Delaware Water Gap hotels. 2 of them aren't really in Delaware Water Gap. The Caramac and there's another one. No, just the Caramac, but it had 2 names. The Fairview, I think it was before that. They were across the river, but they still had to have their address of Delaware Water Gap. So, yeah. Yes.
The Howitts, that's Ben Howitt owned the Shirley Inn later on. And it was on the, if I remember right, it's when you went up 191, it was on the left side, not on the right side where Stroudsburgs. It was on
Well, that's where I thought it was, but I wasn't sure.
Park there now.
Because it wasn't in my talk, but I just got a picture. I just bought a postcard on the Mountain Crest Inn that followed it. And that postcard, it shows a big sprawling resort with a lot of property. So it had to be where there was a lot of property. Yes.
My great uncles, the Von Brocks, owned the Penn Stroud in the 1920s. Do you know, through your research, why they left?
Who was it?
The Von Brocks that owned.
Yeah, no, I don't. I know they owned it.
They had daughters.
What?
They had daughters
Yeah,
who married Bensoners.
yeah.
That's why I think the name died out.
Oh, okay. So her last name changed, and he said the last name changed of the daughter, and the family name died out of the 2 daughters. Yeah.
Two Bensoners.
Yeah. I didn't include everybody on the Penn State. If you would have done that, I've been here half the night.
There also in Stroudsburg Cemetery is a big monument.
Yes,
on
and
rocks.
really
Yeah.
monument.
Yeah. There also was one I didn't add in because it wasn't really a hotel, but there was the Academy Inn, which was up on Thomas Street. And it was also a school. The school, Stroudsburg High School, was there before they built the new high school on Thomas Street. The first new high school. And that Academy Inn, but it didn't really, it housed, it was a boarding house, but it was mainly for people working the railroad. And it didn't really, wasn't really open to the public. But I have it in my book, but I didn't add it in.
Were there any boarding houses that you know of, like up your normal streets or Prospect or near the university?
Not that, well, yeah, the university was very small when those hotels started.
Some of those houses are like pretty big on
No, they were people that had money,
And they were
right?
Got it.
Isn't that right, Amy? That most of those houses were pretty well-to-do people. Like if you go up where Prospect Street comes up, going up Ann Lomick, that's the Breitwieser house, and he was president of East Stroudsburg National Bank, and you run into people like that who built a lot of those big houses, real fancy ones.
Wasn't there like a farm a little ways ways past that on the left-hand side of, whatever that street is now, Smith or whatever, there's like a farm and it kind
Oh,
of.
the Peters Farm.
Yeah.
The Peters Farm was where our church, my church is now, Presbyterian
that's
Church.
where that- okay.
That was the Peters. Amy Peters and Phil Peters was her brother, and I can't remember the rest of the family, but we knew them real well. They were friends of my aunts. And, yeah. They had a big farm up there at one time. Yeah. If there's no other questions, I thank you very much, all of you, for coming. Just to set the record straight, that's one of my granddaughters. That was yelling. Thank you for coming.